professor at Cornell University. He also has a very wide variety of background. He's a captain in the Army Corps of Engineers. He's been an estimator, a project engineer, and a project manager for Dugan and Myers Construction Company with a strong background in contracting and also a partnership with THP Structural Engineers in Cincinnati. And I asked everyone how long they've known Calvin, and everyone has a very similar estimate of time. Ken met Cal a quarter of a century ago. So without further ado, most of you know Ken Hover is a past president of ACI and a leader in many of our committees, including ACI 301, and has worked with Cal in many situations, as you may have seen in this morning's presentation. So it's all yours, Ken.
All right, so do you see performance starting with the end in mind with a highway down the center, Michelle?
We absolutely do. It looks great and you sound great, Have.
All right, excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for this opportunity. But as Calvin knows very, very well, there is an elephant in the room, and we might as well just start by shooting the elephant and talk about the great coffee spill incident. The ACI convention in Chicago, Sunday, March 21st, 2010, 8:30 a.m. local time. The hazmat team was called just minutes after that. And I want to make it clear that my good friend Calvin McCall was the spiller and I was the spillee. In fact, the events of that particular morning ended up commissioning this particular piece of art by Lindsay Merwin of Orlando. This is online right now. You can bid on it. It's worth thousands and thousands of dollars. All right, now this is the official photograph from the Chicago Police Department from that particular event on that particular day. Here are images that were provided by my personal injury lawyer. And ultimately, by the time this whole thing was adjudicated, it turns out that the damages that were awarded for medical costs and emotional distress were zero. The judge did allow $24.50 for the cost of the stain removal at the dry cleaners, which really involved only ordinary washing. And everything would have been fine at that point, except for the fact that my dear wife spoke up and told Calvin and Barbara the reality was that the Dickies work pants from Walmart only cost $19.99. And when the judge heard that, he canceled the award. So that's the way that ended up. But oh gosh, Calvin, I guess we were in court, what, 2 or 3 years or something like that. That was an amazing thing. But Calvin, thank you so much for all of your contributions and for all the things that you have taught me and for all of our friendship. Now, topic for today, performance, starting with the end in mind. And we've heard a lot about performance already today, particularly that really neat talk that Doug gave about performance specifications for concrete durability. But I want to pick up at that point. I want to talk about performance for concrete, but I'd also like to extend this to not only our concrete work and specifications, but for our work and our organizations and our homes and our relationships, starting with the end in mind. So that would be the title, or the title could be Performance Specifications for Construction and Constructive Relationships. Don't tell me how to do it, just tell me what you want me to accomplish and the time and the resources available. Or we could call this Calvin McCall is a performance kind of guy. Now, in 2005, Calvin McCall said to me, Ken, you've got 301C. He selected me as chairperson for sections 4 and 5. And he said, Ken, we're moving in a new direction, and here's where we need to take it. I think these will be your challenges. And then he said, here's our schedule, and I really would need your help and your ideas. Let's talk before the first meeting in Kansas City. At no point did Calvin tell me how I needed to execute the work for sections 4 and 5. He never gave me a detailed prescription. He was very clear to give me outcomes. And the outcome ultimately came out, as outcomes are supposed to do in that 301-10. Now, since that time, the spirit has lived on, and I need to acknowledge my multiple bosses and mentors in Committee 301. Calvin and Jim and Michelle and Daniel and Henry and John, all of whom have taught me an awful lot. Now, here's a typical ACI 301 meeting 1 Saturday agenda. 1, call to order. 2, self-introductions. 3, resolution of negatives. And 4, adjourn. And I didn't make that up. I just copied it right down from an agenda that is available on our website. Now, resolution of negatives. That's the main thing. Or I'm from Southern Ohio, so I would say that's the mainest thing. And what does resolution of negatives really involve? It involves criticism. It involves raising objections. It involves resolving differences. And ultimately, something which is very hard to do, and that is making changes. A lot of us agree that we need to make changes in the world around us, but that we don't particularly need to make any changes about our own personal behavior or habits. Now, when I was in college, a really good friend and professor was Professor Neil Jeffries. He was actually a mechanical engineer, and he took me under his wing. I worked in his lab for a while, and he taught me a lot of wisdom kind of stuff. And one of the things he said is, Ken, you will eventually encounter people who say, I don't want to make things better. I just want to complain about the way they are. And by golly, those people do exist out there. And by golly, there's some of us in ACI and on ACI committees. And I did not realize at the time that Neil Jeffries was saying, Ken, you will discover that there are times when you will say, I don't want to make things better. I just want to complain about the way they are. And it turns out that that does happen when we're trying to resolve negatives. Now, in a meeting chaired by Calvin McCall, there will be people like myself and some of my cohorts who will love to complain. And Calvin will sit there and listen to us complain. And he'll listen for about a minute. And ultimately, he wants to know, well, what is it you want to do? What can we do to help? And eventually, Calvin will then give this standard response to resolving differences. Those of us who have been on committees with him have heard this 1,000 times. What would make you happy? He's trying to get to the point, all right, we understand there's a problem here. We understand there's a difference that needs to be resolved. What is your desired outcome? Now, it turns out that Calvin is fully in step with some of the greatest minds of the century in regards to leadership, management, and getting things done. The famous Steven Covey wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. And Steven Covey says to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. Now, not to be outdone, the other great management guru, Peter Drucker, invented the phrase management by objectives. And Peter says management by objectives, cool people, trendy people call that MBO, is a strategic management model that aims to improve the performance of an organization or an ACI committee or a company or a work team or a school team or a class of students or a family or a relationship with your significant other by clearly defining objectives. So Calvin McCall's standard response to resolve differences, what would make you happy, is functionally the same as what's your objective, what's our objective, and that's about the same thing as saying what's our destination. So Calvin is fully in sync with the other 2 great management gurus of our time. And then Calvin will always say, then we can figure out how to get there. Now, just to show some similitude here, we've got 3 gurus, Covey, Drucker, and McCall. And what is their goal word, destination, objective, or what makes you happy? And of course, the picture of the 3 wise men is fully for Barbara's benefit. Now, in our business of design and construction and the provision of innumerable goods and services essential thereunto, the project owner's happiness or satisfaction, if they're not the happiness type, is essential for our own happiness or satisfaction if we're not the happiness type. And the project owner's continued satisfaction is essential to our own continued income stream, no matter what part of the puzzle we're playing with here, except we do actually have a subset of our industry in which their business depends on unhappy owners. If all the owners were happy all the time, there's a bunch of us that would be out of work. Now, we all realize that if the owner ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And by extension, if the owner and the owner's representatives, the architect and the engineer, ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. That's just a fact. Now, in a prescriptive world, satisfaction comes from doing exactly what we are told to do in exactly the way we were told to do it, just like in kindergarten when we colored and we were supposed to stay in between the lines. And we all know in the real world that doing exactly what we were told to do doesn't always satisfy everybody in the food chain. For example, one of my very first consulting jobs in regards to architectural concrete, there was a fully prescriptive specification for this particular building. The coarse and the fine aggregate source, the grading and the batch weight were specified. The cement plant and the cement batch weight were specified. The water source and the weight of water were specified. The admixture manufacturer and the dose were specified in the construction documents. The formwork was specified, the form liner was specified, and the form release agent was specified. And the contractor went right down the list and did every single thing the contractor was required to do. But the problem was the university subsequently decided that the color was unsatisfactory. So what was the solution to that problem? Withhold the round sum of $1 million from the contractor. And they say, but we did everything we were told to do. And they said, well, we don't disagree with that, but the trouble is that is not what we were looking for. So what's the lesson at the end of the day? And I was very glad that I learned this lesson early in my career, that when you finally get down to the bottom of things, when you finally get to the point where an owner does or does not write a check for the full amount of the contract, performance takes precedence over prescription. And therefore, if the owner and architect and engineer ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, and that is true regardless of whether prescriptive requirements have been met. Now, in the concrete performance world, satisfaction comes from a delivered product that meets stated end product requirements within the bounds of allocated time and resources. So Calvin's question is the key question. What will make the owner, the architect, and the engineer happy? Then our job is to figure out how to get there. Now, a typical concrete specification model is somewhere along this line. As far as concrete strength is concerned, we've got lab tests, and then we have field tests, and we have core tests. And then we ultimately add half a sack of cement, and we cure under lab or field conditions, hot or cold, whatever. Now, if it's air and drain concrete, it gets a little more complicated. We got air at the chute, okay, but air at placement is low, so we add AEA. Now the air is too high, and we reject, and we keep climbing up the ladder. Now, note, by the way, this is very important. This may be the most powerful takeaway from the day. Air content does not vary when air content is not measured. Now, this leads us to the whole idea of performance specification, and Doug talked about that this morning, and it's absolutely no coincidence that Doug and I are both talking about performance. He and I and John Bickley were the contractors to NRMCA on the prescription to performance initiative. NRMCA's definition says a performance specification outlines functional requirements for hardened concrete. Got to have clear, achievable, measurable, and enforceable. Clearly specify your test methods and your acceptance criteria. You test for pre-qualification and you test for job site acceptance. You avoid requirements for means and methods, and you avoid limitations on the ingredients or the proportions. All right, now that's one definition. The CSA A23.1 definition, a performance concrete specification is a method of specifying a construction product in which a final outcome is given in mandatory language in a manner that the performance requirements can be measured by accepted industry standards and methods. Goes on to say the processes, methods, or activities used by the contractors, manufacturers, and material suppliers are then left to their discretion. Now, it's common and generally pretty easy to tell somebody exactly what you want them to do, exactly how you want them to do it, and how often you'll be back to check, inspect, correct, and criticize. And a very common acceptance criteria, whether we're talking about concrete or whether we're talking about asking a family member or a coworker to handle a particular task, the easy thing is to not only tell them what you want them to do, but exactly how to do it, and then not give them any significant acceptance criteria, but just wander back in periodically and drop a bomblet on, well, that's really not what we had in mind. Now, if you don't provide real acceptance criteria, if you don't give the doer of the task a definition of what is an acceptable outcome, you don't have any choice but to micromanage and hover. And I do say hover and not hover. Now, did you ever realize that babies are really great at signaling an unacceptable situation? But babies are not so great at clearly telling you what it is they want and what it would take to make things better. Could that analogy possibly apply to some specifiers or bosses or coworkers or family members? I don't know. Let's leave that question a rhetorical one. Now, it's actually much harder and far rarer to tell somebody the following, but it is far more effective if you do tell them the end objective, the available resources, the bounds and constraints, and how they will be able to judge whether the work is satisfactory. You've had a good, solid communication if it ends up with, here's how you can tell if your work is okay. I do not have to keep coming back here every other day and telling you missed a spot. So performance specifications are a marvelous idea, but they take considerably more thought. And they also require, as Doug pointed out earlier, that we forget our favorite time-honored details of procedures, means, and methods. When you get down to it, we love our rituals. We absolutely do love our rituals. And in fact, the ACI certification process actually ordains people who can perform these rituals with the appropriate solemnity. The ritual of the slumping of the concrete, the ritual of the making of the cylinders, the ritual of the testing of the air. We are in love with that kind of stuff. We're not so great at saying what those numbers really mean, but by golly, we do them appropriately. It's focusing on the end results that really matter. Are those end results clearly stated? Are they measurable? And here is what is sticky about a performance specification. You can't keep adding on extra acceptance criteria later on. Oh, and by the way, that color's a little bit too blotchy, but you didn't say anything about blotchification. Well, I just now thought it up. That you can't play it that way. So one of the biggest stumbling blocks to performance specifications is the person writing the performance specification knowing enough about what's really going on to ask for everything they want. And the specifier can ask for anything they want, but they got one shot, and that's pre-bid. After that, it's change order time. Now, Peter Drucker himself said management by objective works if you first think through your objectives, and 90% of the time you haven't. That's the problem. You got to figure out in advance how to define what you want. This whole notion that I'll know it when I see it, if you are the specifier or you, the person giving out the task, that just flat out does not work. If you can't describe what it is you want, who on earth can describe it? And don't underestimate the challenge of clearly defining what it is you want to see in the end product. For example, maybe you've been involved in this particular scenario. He said, "Welcome home from your trip away. I'm almost done." And the chilly response was, "That's not what I had in mind." Ladies and gentlemen, I have been there. And the motivation immediately drops to the bottom. Look at the smile on that face. That does not last very long when somebody says, "That's not what I had in mind." Let me give you a couple stories. Very early in my time in the THP engineers, I was working on a repair project for a parking garage. And it became my responsibility, since it was a repair job. We wrote the entire specs ourselves. There was not an architect involved. So I put together the entire specifications manual. And I was also told to go out and get it bound. So I was so proud of this thing. I went out and I got that baby plastic laminated. I got the front cover a different color from the back cover. Can you believe it? I got a gray front cover, a black back cover. I got a red spiral binding. They finally were delivered from the print shop. I took them to my boss, and his response was, "Don't do that again." Well, all righty then. It's the equivalent of "I'll know it when I see it," and that's not it. So you would think I learned, but my motivation took a serious drop at that particular point. Well, a few years later, I'd become a partner, and they said, "Okay, Ken, we got to go have a new corporate brochure. You go figure out the cover art." So I brought in our business manager for the consulting company, and we sat down, and I said, "I am delegating to you the job of coming up with a cover art for the corporate brochure. So what do you think? A couple weeks, you can bring in some samples." And I thought the meeting was over. But our business manager, who was a very astute lady named Juanita Mills, she then said to me, "Please tell me how you will evaluate my proposals. Tell me what you are looking for. That will save me a lot of time, and that will help me bring back to you a larger number of potential ideas that I already know you're going to like." Wow. That was a very significant lesson for me when she had the courage to say, "Tell me how you will evaluate my proposals." A fair question. And her motivation went way up because I had to say, "Look, give me a little bit of time here. I'll get back to you in 2 days." And I did. And the cycle time on that cover art was cut way back. Now, in the general performance world, satisfaction comes from accomplishing the things that need to be accomplished within the bounds of allocated time and resources. Within our own relationships at work or home, can we focus on, or at least discuss, what really needs to be accomplished instead of just going through the motions? Can we be clear about expectations and criteria for success? Can we forego details of how to accomplish the task while extending suggestions and being available if anybody has questions? But let's not clobber them over the head with, "Well, you got to do it this way, then you got to do it that way." The essence is, tell me what you want to accomplish, not how to do it. Now, I'm actually very proud of my 7-page specification for grass cutting. This is an absolute beauty. I love cutting grass. I love the way it looks when you're all done. We've got 3 acres way out here in the country in Lansing, New York, which is actually where the wagon train started that ultimately settled Lansing, Michigan. Same latitude, same crops, they just followed the line. Now, I've got a beautiful grass cutting specification. In fact, it's 3-part: general, products, and execution, timing, grass length, grass moisture content, weather. Products: Dixon ZTR 60-inch Toro push mower, Echo weed trimmer, gas and oil. Execution: evenness, pattern, yard and equipment cleanup, and of course, safety. Now, I put that spec out to invited qualified bidders only. That included Deb, Lisa, and Laura. And I thought there would actually be a great deal of competition for this particular job. I was looking forward to opening the bids. Well, I got no bidders. And as a result, for a very long time right now, I've been self-performing my grass cutting. But actually, it's therapy. Now, not to be outdone, our family has a dishwashing specification which beats my grass cutting specification all to pieces. The dishwashing specification begins with transporting the dirty dishes from the table to the kitchen. There is a stacking order. There is a scraping order to the garbage can, to dispose all, to pre-wash rinsing, sink degreasing, dishcloth preconditioning, water temperature, AEA, detergent dose, agitation, foam index, sequence of washing, tomato sauce second last, greasy pans last, washing execution, dishcloth, scratchy thing, Brillo, SOS or equal, final rinse, stacking, drying, inspection, rewash, disposal of broken dishes and glassware, transport to the cupboard, clean up kitchen, and take out the garbage. Now, many times I have been found to not be in compliance with our home dishwashing specification. But in essence, just tell me what you want to accomplish, not how to do it. Now, I got to tell you, there are some really genuine benefits from being designated as functionally incompetent to wash dishes. It gives you a lot more time off. Now, why performance? Because unless there really is only one way to do it, there might be a better, faster, safer, more enjoyable, more sustainable, value added, more cost effective, more competitive, smarter way to get it done with fewer unintended consequences. Why performance? The doer will be more motivated to perform. Performance specs and management by objective are dedicated to the proposition that if you tell people what you really want, the chances of getting it improve. P.S. The holidays are coming, folks. Of course, that presupposes that you know what you really want. So Calvin's question is the key question. What would make you happy? Then we will figure out how to get there. As Calvin once said, keep calm and begin with the end in mind. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions for Ken? Please put them in the Q&A. I don't see any at the moment, but I do. There's a comment that someone's clapping, but I was dying laughing. I was there for the coffee incident. It's a true story. Calvin was very proud of his new mug that did not spill, but he forgot that essential step of attaching the lid. And I also learned a new word today, Ken, that I may or may not add to design and control, blotchification. That would
yes, it's a very critical word in architectural concrete.
It's awesome. Oh, we do have a very important question here. Was there cream in the coffee?
That's a good question. I was in so much pain and agony at the time that I don't think I recall.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it really is a true story, but oh my. Okay.
Well, Michelle, you were there then when the EMTs came in and carried me out, right?
No, I missed that part, sir. I saw the aftermath, not the actual spill.